Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our morning coffee time for Tuesday, September the 22nd. How's everyone this morning? For those who were here yesterday, you know it's been a very long morning for me already. I went to bed early, but that doesn't necessarily mean I fell asleep early. And I woke up about 1:45. But it seems well worth it, despite the fact that I feel like I've been working the graveyard shift this morning. So we had a little bit of smoke creeping back into the gorge yesterday, maybe more so out on the river than here at the Hermitage. Proof that the Buddha was onto something with this ever-present recollection into the characteristic of anicca. Things are impermanent, and as Ajahn Chah put a little bit of a spin on that, not sure. And I was glad I had invested some time in not making too tight of a decision that the smoke was over. Just sets one up for that, oh no, here we go again. I thought we were done with this, or other such negative thoughts in the movement towards tanha and fear and anxiety, self-pity, or a whole host of other unskillful reactions that would support the experience of dukkha. It was not sure when it left. It was not sure when it came. And this is why we try to see the limitation and the flaw in taking refuge in conditioned reality or conditioned things in the world, as we say. And as I was reflecting yesterday, it's part of why a better response can be just to arouse a sense of gratitude and dwell with that without asking for anything. Sense of gratitude, sense of patience, the willingness to take life one breath at a time, confident in the knowledge that we can do this and that there's no sense creating any excessive or undue suffering. No matter what challenge life throws at us or what conditions that we may have to endure, they will change, they will pass. So, and if my gratitude for fresh air and breathing easy had slipped at all yesterday, it's a good poke and a good reminder to be vigilant and heedful and mindful. Part of the part of sati, or the part of mindfulness that doesn't get enough attention, is the remembrance part of it, which is the more literal translation of sati. And in that sense, part of what sati means is to remember the right way to see your experience, the right way to frame your experience that supports one in goodness and supports one in alleviating suffering. So remembering to be selfless and giving, remembering to be careful about the ethical and moral choices that we're taking, remembering our virtue, remembering to be friendly and kind, loving, compassionate, gracious, gentle, equanimous. We forget these things, don't we? The rough and tumble of life, the identities, the roles, the responsibilities. They support a kind of forgetting. And part of what's strongest in my mind this morning is, of course, having spent 3.5 hours gathered with some of the finest beings on the planet. There's about 60 senior monks and nuns from all over the world. Our various international branch monasteries gathered this morning. And so part of what's on my mind is just the blessing of being in relationship with those beings and being in Sangha, and the social component, as I call it, and the role that that plays in helping us remember, creating the opportunity to remember a lot of our interactions in the way that we live our lives in the monastery, with the commitments that we make to one another, the commitments we make to monastic practice and the monastic schedule, is a structure of ritual, a structure of practice, a structure of living by the Dhamma and the Vinaya, the Dhamma and the discipline that the Buddha taught, which is just really one of the most excellent structures to create a community and relationships and context to be reminded again and again. We live in such a strongly individualistic society that I probably can't make this point enough, but you can't do this on your own. You're responsible for it, but you can't do this work on your own. You need the good friend. You need the wise words of others. You need models and mentors and reminders and structures. And one of the most simple ones is just the sight of the samana. Just to samana is an ancient Pali word, and it can be translated different ways. It's related to the word samatha, which is serenity or evenness, peacefulness. The samana is the one who seeks peace, but it was used as a designation for the practitioner, for the monk, for the nun, for the ascetic, for the yogi, for the seeker of peace. And there's several wonderful instances in the suttas where just the mere presence of the Buddha or one of his great disciples helps people remember what it is that is true, what it is that is beneficial, what it is that is precious in this human life, and what it is that tethers us or grounds us in Dhamma, that which supports true goodness, true well-being, and the potential to be free from dukkha, free from suffering, free from that which is unsatisfactory. So, and having lived here at the Pacific Hermitage now for 10 years, I find myself in a similar situation to a lot of my brothers and sisters in the Sangha. We do have our share of monasteries that have 1, 2, 3, 4, or just a few monks. And as you age in the Sangha and have a role as an abbot or an abbess or a senior monk or a senior nun, sometimes you don't get a lot of time with your peers. So we didn't talk about anything extremely lofty. It was the first chance for many of the monks and nuns in our gathering this morning just to see each other's face and hear each other's voice. And in some instances, some of the samanas hadn't seen or heard each other for a decade or more, which is not uncommon. So I consider it a great triumph and a very good use of time just to have participated in everyone making the effort to connect in that way, with the hope that we can do that a bit more. We've been trying to meet in person, which is very important as well, for years, but increasingly that's getting difficult, and there's a concern of the expense and the time and the impact on the environment of flying monks and nuns all over the world so they can share time together. So, and we have these technologies, makes good sense to put them to use, to good use. Plenty of people are using them for frivolous purposes, and even a few people for downright evil purposes or nefarious purposes. So anyways, part one of our two kind of global meetings happened this morning, and it was wonderful. It went off very well, and I'm looking forward to Wednesday hosting another one of those at a more appropriate time for the West Coast. The next one starts early afternoon on Wednesday, so I won't have to get up so early for that. So let's see, 78 of my favorite non-monastic friends are here. I don't know if any of my monastic friends are lurking, but I can see 78 people are here. Let me take a moment to take a swig of coffee and check the chat room out to see if there's any good questions. What is the difference between Tibet Buddhism and Thai Buddhism? Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate so much. I feel like I have a new home here. Well, that's a pretty broad and big question, and I've never really studied Tibetan Buddhism in any depth, so I'm far from an expert on it. What I've been led to believe from the various things I've read over the years, I can tease out a few different distinctions. The school of Buddhism are the styles of Buddhist practice and life, and even the books that they look to in Thailand are most commonly referred to in this day and age as Theravadan Buddhism. And I think the overwhelming majority of knowledgeable Buddhists and scholars consider the Pali Canon of the Theravadan tradition to be the only complete preserved record of the Buddha's and his early disciples' teachings, and to be the earliest that we know of. So there's something of the focus and the flavor of Theravadan Buddhism that is probably preserved one of the very earliest schools. After the Buddha died, maybe 100 or 200 years, they don't know the exact date, Buddhism, as it started to spread through South Asia and then to many parts of the world, started to drift apart, and different schools of Buddhism developed with different focuses, and sometimes a greater emphasis on later text and commentarial traditions that developed over time. So it's thought, at least from my reading, that the Theravadan school hones a bit more closely to the teaching of the Theras, or the elders, which may reference some early division or split into different schools. And some went the way of the elders, or the old ways, and some went in different ways. So probably the biggest distinction to make is that it's believed that the Theravada and the school of Buddhism, and the teachings that are looked to in Theravadan lands like Thailand, are centered around and focused on earlier Buddhist teachings and earlier forms of Buddhist life and practice. Buddhism took quite a long time to reach Tibet, and many new schools and texts and teachings and different focuses for Buddhist life and practice had developed by the time Buddhism comes to Tibet and then eventually integrates into Tibetan culture and society. So the focuses, the language, the teachings, and the fact that they're integrating with a very different culture and a very different geography and different place, different time, causes a lot of differences. But the many of the core teachings are shared by both traditions. So I don't know if that's meaningful, Karen. There may even be people in the chat that could explain the differences with greater difficulty, so I won't kind of belabor the point. I've never made a concerted study of Tibetan Buddhism, so I can't give a very authoritative contrast and comparison. But that might help give you a bit of a sense of it. We live kind of in an exciting time because of various factors. It seems that, we refer to these, like, notice what we're doing here. We're talking about Thai Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. And if we think of these as two different countries, we're talking about what looks like national forms of Buddhism. And for a great many centuries, Buddhism there's always been some sort of exchange between countries and some exchange between various Buddhist schools and Buddhisms, but we're now in an age where there's greater contact and communication, and hopefully greater understanding of each other's traditions. Good morning, Samrit. Dear Ajahn, favorable conditions cannot be considered as true refuge, yet are they still not essential for our spiritual progress, as too much adversity can take a toll on us? Absolutely. Favorable conditions are blessings. Favorable conditions should be sought out. We should do what we can to nurture and maintain favorable conditions, both for ourselves and our family and our communities. Part of what makes something skillful or makes something good is that it supports well-being, and it supports blessings, it supports that which is favorable, and it is much easier to build upon that. And what it is that is unskillful and evil is not supportive of those things. It weakens those things, it undermines those things, and it should be prevented, avoided, resolved, guarded against. And, questions like that oftentimes stimulate in me this comparison to what's going on in Buddhist cosmology. It's believed that the human realm is the most favorable of all rebirths. There are more sublime levels, there are more sublime realms to be reborn in, with less suffering and more beauty, greater, more refined forms of pleasure and happiness, the higher realms. And there are lower realms with much more pain and suffering and absent pleasure. The reason the human realm is considered, though, the highest or the most favorable rebirth is because you're in the middle and you're not so blissed out that you can't see or understand dukkha, or you don't feel the motivation to understand dukkha. And you're not overwhelmed by pain and suffering and unfavorable conditions. And this is analogous to, I think, how we should think about our own mind and body, as well as our family, our community, the relationships that we develop. We want to seek favorable conditions. If we become too overwhelmed by unfavorable conditions, we're really weakening and compromising a good foundation for developing the good and developing the path. So like in the lower realms, it's difficult, if not impossible, to make good karma. So but the Buddha also sort of guards us against stopping at just enjoying favorable conditions, because they are ephemeral, they are conditioned, they are insecure, and they're not a true refuge because of that. So they are to be cultivated, they are to be appreciated, but not attached to. When we have meaningful connections with others, we feel happy. Should we strive to create more meaningful connections? It's difficult to know how much we should seek to create. And there should be a second part here. Those connections without creating suffering. I'm not sure what my question is, but how much effort should we put into this, and what to do when it's not working? Well, Eleanor, this seems to have a strong relationship to Sumrit's question, which I just answered, and at least that's the way I would interpret it, like meaningful connections with others. That's a subset of favorable conditions that we want to seek in our life, and it is difficult. Human relationship is challenging. But we, like, to return to my earlier reflection, you can't do this alone. I often sort of think, mostly from reading about anthropology and what we understand of human nature from a scientific perspective, that humans might be able to survive alone, but they certainly don't thrive. And for most of human history, humans don't even survive alone. We are social creatures, and in some sense we live or die based on our ability to live with some meaningful connection and in harmony with other beings. But any student of human life and human relations knows that it's not always so meaningful or not always so fortunate and beneficial. It's quite the challenge. But we should not give up. And I think there's something analogous going on in terms of somebody seeking well-being, and most especially spiritual well-being. Meaningful relationship, meaningful connections with others are paramount. Ultimately, we are responsible for ending our own suffering and understanding the teachings, putting them into practice. But it's not much of a stretch to say you cannot do that alone. And good relationships are some of the most beneficial and favorable conditions that we can experience in life. If you look at the happiness literature that emerges from psychology, or maybe social psychology, I'm not exactly sure how they classify that field in academia. Meaningful and good relationships are pretty high in the things that correlate with people that feel satisfied with their life and feel happy with their life, and that evaluate themselves as having lived a purposeful and meaningful life. And while that might happen outside of religious or spiritual community, I think most of it happens with something of that as context. Like part of the way I even think about the human traditions of spirituality and religion it's like this evolving collective attempt to learn how to live in the best way, in the most skillful way, and in a happy way, and with meaning. And as institutions, religions are like everything else. They are imperfect. But thinking here more about the more fundamental thing that's kind of going on there in the broader scope of humanity, in the broader scope of human communities and human relationships. Good morning, Brandon. Good to see you back in the chat. How to notice aversion to materialism, or if you're simply letting go. Well, you have to be sensitive to the emotional tone, I would say. Like, there should be no aversion or anger or ill will if you're letting go. Like, aversion has this angry, hateful, frustrated feeling to it. You want to push it away, which is very different than just letting something go. So letting go should feel equanimous, easeful, positive. And we don't want to feel averse to materialism. I'm guessing what you're meaning here, like not materialism as the philosophy, but this investment in trying to find happiness in things and happiness in the material world. But the Buddha does exhort us to see the limitation of that way of trying to find fulfillment and happiness through mere owning, buying, collecting, hoarding, securing things in the world. Good morning, Holly. I think the Ajahn Chah lineage calls themselves a Thai forest tradition. Do you think this European and global community will simply call itself Theravadan forest tradition? Oh, it's possible. Maybe in 100 years or so. Don't know. I mean, we're not that far from the life of Ajahn Chah, and still many of his early pioneering disciples are still alive. Also, not all of us are Europeans. The diversity is pretty strong in the community of people coming from all over the place. Maybe if I look at the community roster and the place of birth of all the monks and nuns that have ever ordained in one of our monasteries, the overwhelming majority is European, but increasingly it's becoming more and more diverse. People from different Southeast Asian countries, South Asian countries, China, Korea, Japan, Russia, Slavic countries, South America, Africa. I'm sure I've left somebody out. We don't have any Inuit monks yet that I know of, but it's not solely European. So I've kind of come to taking the word the international branch monasteries of the Ajahn Chah tradition or something like that. Okay, well, for those who might not have seen this in the chat, I'll share this, and it'll be the last thing because I have to go. I have a meeting at 9 o'clock I have to go get onto. Bhikkhu Bodhi has a brilliant explanation about the differences and similarities. I can't attach a link, but you can search Bhikkhu Bodhi Bridging the Two Vehicles on YouTube. So thank you, Zola, for the suggestion. And I'm going to leave it at that for today, friends. I see there's a whole bunch of comments I didn't get to, and I see there's very nice friendly interaction between people in the chat room, which I feel good sense of mudita for. It is certainly a great part of my intention for this to be a place for good people to connect with each other and support one another in their love of Dhamma. So be well, friends, and have a good day. Breathe easy. Go forth with a heart of gratitude and kindness, and put forth effort to preserve the good and fortunate conditions of your life and to plant the seeds for an increase in those things and a maturation of those things in your life. Practice like your hair's on fire, doing goodness, because who knows what tomorrow will bring. So be well, friends, and I'll see you tomorrow.